You are simply living without the constant pressure to manage another person's reactions. The old dynamic has lost something important: your participation. There may come a moment when the old dynamic tries to pull you backward just when you are becoming calm. A message arrives after weeks of quiet. A familiar name appears. Suddenly, memories flood back. But this is where the turning point lives. Not in whether they return, but in whether you return to who you were. You remember the good moments first. That is normal. Your mind does not archive relationships like a courtroom transcript. It keeps warmth beside pain, laughter beside disappointment, hope beside evidence. The danger is believing that one beautiful memory proves the whole relationship was healthy. A memory can be real and still be incomplete. Then you remember the pattern. Not one argument. Not one mistake. The pattern. The repeated confusion. The promises that sounded convincing until behavior stayed the same. The apologies that became temporary bridges back into familiar behavior. Genuine change is measured over time, not by the emotional intensity of one conversation. If they reach out, you may feel an old reflex awaken. Explain yourself. Make them understand. Correct the story. Prove you were not the villain. But you do not have to enter a courtroom where the other person controls the rules. Your healing does not require a verdict from someone who benefited from misunderstanding you. This is the strange power of silence. It gives reality room to speak. Without constant arguments, you can notice patterns more clearly. Without their voice dominating your thoughts, your own voice becomes audible. You begin asking questions you could not ask while surviving the next emotional storm. What did I tolerate? What did I abandon in myself? That realization can hurt. Healing is not always comforting at first. Sometimes peace reveals how exhausted you were. Sometimes freedom makes you angry because you realize how long you spent negotiating for basic respect. Let that truth exist without turning it into revenge. Your anger can be information without becoming your new prison. And then something unexpected happens. The narcissist becomes less important, not because you defeated them, but because your life becomes larger. Friends return. Work feels lighter. Music sounds different. Your mornings belong to you. You stop building imaginary conversations in your head. Their moods and posts begin to feel strangely distant. That is the real shift in power. It is not making them jealous. It is not making them chase you. It is reaching the point where their reaction is no longer required to confirm your worth. Once you stop needing their regret, you stop being emotionally dependent on the outcome of their story. They may still try to reopen the door. Some use charm. Some use guilt. Some use anger. Some act as though nothing happened. Your job is not to predict which mask appears next. Your job is to recognize the pattern beneath the mask and decide whether returning to it serves the life you are trying to build. Because the moment you understand that, silence changes meaning. It is no longer punishment. It is not a secret message. It is not a performance designed to make someone suffer. It is simply the space between who you were and who you are becoming. And that space, once protected, can become the beginning of a life that no longer revolves around them. The consequences of a narcissistic pattern are often quieter than people expect. There may be no dramatic collapse, no confession, no perfect moment when everyone sees the truth. Sometimes the consequence is simply repetition. The same conflicts with different people, the same promises, the same endings, because the underlying pattern never changed. When someone depends heavily on external validation, silence can expose the limits of that strategy. New attention may feel exciting, but attention is temporary. Praise fades. Novelty wears off. People develop boundaries. Eventually, relationships ask for something deeper than performance: consistency, accountability, and emotional maturity. That is where patterns become difficult to hide. You do not need to wait around to witness that process. Waiting can keep you psychologically attached. If your healing depends on seeing them suffer, they still occupy the center of the story. The deeper freedom is realizing that consequences belong to their choices, while your responsibility is deciding what happens next in your own life. Maybe they appear happier than ever. Maybe they seem successful. Maybe mutual acquaintances tell you they have changed. You are allowed to hear that without abandoning your own experience. Public appearance is not a reliable measure of private character, and neither is someone else's story about them. You know what you lived. The hardest part is accepting that closure may never arrive in the form you imagined. They may never apologize correctly. They may never admit what they did. They may never understand the cost of their behavior. Waiting for that confession can become another form of contact. Sometimes closure begins when you stop asking an unavailable person for what they refuse to give. Your silence can become an act of self-respect, but only if it is connected to your healing. If you are silent while secretly checking every account, hoping for a message, or imagining their regret, the relationship still has a pulse inside your mind. That is not failure. It simply means emotional bonds often take longer to release than physical contact. Give yourself that time. Your nervous system does not instantly understand what your mind has decided. You can know that leaving was right and still miss the person. You can feel relieved and sad in the same afternoon. You can remember the good and still refuse the pattern. Healing becomes real when you stop demanding that emotions agree before you protect yourself. One day, silence may become so normal that you forget why it once felt terrifying. You will make a decision without imagining their reaction. You will hear a song without remembering the argument attached to it. You will enter a room without scanning for their mood. That is not emptiness. That is your attention returning home. And if they notice that change, let them notice. If they do not, let them not. Your progress cannot be built around whether someone else recognizes it. The strongest boundary is not the one that creates the biggest reaction. It is the one you can maintain quietly, consistently, and without needing an audience to applaud you. Because eventually, the question stops being whether the narcissist fears your silence. The question becomes whether you trust your own voice enough to keep the silence when breaking it would reopen the same wound. And when you can answer that honestly, you have already crossed the distance that once seemed impossible. Maybe you once believed silence meant losing someone. Now you can see another possibility. Silence can mean losing the role you were forced to play. The rescuer, the explainer, the peacemaker, the person who kept translating their behavior into excuses so the relationship could continue. Letting that role die can make room for you. You do not need to become heartless to become unavailable to manipulation. You can remain compassionate and still have limits. You can forgive privately and never reopen the relationship. You can wish someone well from a distance. These are not contradictions. They are signs that your empathy is no longer being used as a doorway into your life. Perhaps that is what the silence was teaching you all along. You were not powerless because you cared. You were simply giving too much access to someone who had not learned how to handle it responsibly. The lesson is not to stop loving. The lesson is to stop confusing love with unlimited access and unlimited chances. If the narcissistic person feels unsettled by your silence, that is their experience to process. If they move on quickly, that is theirs too. If they return, you still get to decide. Your worth does not rise when they chase you, and it does not fall when they ignore you. Your worth existed before the relationship and remains after it. Real healing can look almost boring from the outside. It is making breakfast without checking your phone. It is laughing with someone who does not make you question yourself. It is sleeping without rehearsing tomorrow's confrontation. It is having a quiet afternoon and realizing that quiet no longer feels like danger. These ordinary moments are freedom. There may still be difficult days. A smell, a place, a date, or a familiar phrase can bring the past rushing forward. Do not mistake a memory for a command. You can feel the wave without getting back in the water. You can miss what you hoped the relationship would become without returning to what it actually was. Your silence does not have to prove anything. It does not need to be dramatic enough to hurt them. It does not need to make them wonder. It only needs to protect the life you are rebuilding. That is a stronger purpose because it does not depend on another person's reaction. It depends on your commitment to yourself. One day you may realize the most frightening thing about silence was never what it would do to them. It was what it would reveal to you. Without the noise, you could finally hear how much you had been sacrificing. Without the chaos, you could finally feel how tired you were. Without the chase, you could finally ask what you wanted. That is why silence can feel so powerful. It removes the distraction and leaves the truth standing there. You were not born to spend your life managing someone else's ego, moods, approval, or anger. You are allowed to step away. You are allowed to choose peace. And you are allowed to let unanswered questions remain unanswered. So if the silence continues, let it continue for the right reason. Not because you want them to suffer, but because you finally understand what your peace is worth. The door does not have to slam. It can simply stay closed. And as your life grows quieter, fuller, and more yours, the silence becomes freedom.